Part 2, The Ghosts of the Past. Chapter 6, Life After Shadows. Months passed after the fall of Salvatore. The city, once buzzing with the hum of the underground empire, now lived in uneasy quiet. The three shadows had vanished without a trace, as they had promised, leaving behind a shattered criminal world. The alliances they had formed were dissolved, their enemies too afraid to rise again. But even in their absence, trouble followed. The city had been built on a foundation of crime, and with Salvatore's death, there was an inevitable power vacuum. The underworld would never stay dormant for long. Alex, Marcus, and Ethan, now living under false identities in different corners of the world, struggled to find peace. They had all taken new names and new lives, but the memories of their violent pasts continued to haunt them, pulling them back to the world they had tried to escape. Chapter 7, The Return of the Shadows. For Alex, the strategist, the quiet life was never enough. He found himself getting pulled back into the game. His mind, sharp and calculating, couldn't silence the constant urge to control, to plot. It wasn't long before a message reached him, an old contact from the past, a ghost who hadn't disappeared with Salvatore. The message was simple: "They're coming for you." Someone, it seemed, had been tracking the movements of the former three shadows. They were hunting them, not out of revenge, but to use them. The message came from someone Alex trusted at least once. Ethan. Alex, knowing the inevitable danger of his past catching up to him, made the decision to return. He knew he couldn't do it alone, so he reached out to Marcus. If anyone understood the need for vengeance, it was him. Chapter 8, The Reunion. The two men met in an abandoned industrial area, a place that felt strangely familiar. Marcus had been living a quiet life as a bodyguard, working for a private firm, but the violence he had left behind still tugged at him. It was his anger that never went away. The deep bitterness from the betrayal they had suffered still burned, even as he built a life that tried to move beyond it. When Alex arrived, Marcus didn't ask questions. He didn't have to. They were brothers in blood, and when the shadows called, they would answer. The two of them set off to find Ethan. The quiet one. The thinker. He had vanished the moment Salvatore's empire fell, taking a different path from the others. Ethan had tried to leave it all behind, to live a normal life, but the pull of the past was too strong. The ghosts of those they had killed, the lives they had ruined, had been clawing at his soul for too long. Chapter 9, Ethan's Choice. Ethan was living in a small coastal town, far from the chaos of the city. He had changed his appearance, his identity, everything about his life was different. The peaceful waves crashing on the shore reminded him of a simpler time. But deep down, he knew that no matter how far he ran, the past was never truly gone. When Alex and Marcus showed up at his doorstep, Ethan's first instinct was to refuse. He didn't want to go back. But they weren't asking for his help, they were demanding it. They had learned that a new force was rising in the city, someone even more dangerous than Salvatore. A new criminal syndicate, led by a mysterious figure known only as the Architect, was taking over. The Architect was a ghost, a master manipulator who seemed to know every move the trio had ever made. He had connections everywhere and was systematically eliminating anyone who posed a threat to his ascent. And now, it seemed, he was after the three shadows. Ethan knew they couldn't run forever. Ethan relented. His old friends were right. The past was never truly behind them. And in that moment, Ethan made a choice: if they were going to face the Architect, they had to come together once more. As the three shadows. Chapter 10, The Architect's Game. The three shadows were back, and they quickly learned that their old ways no longer worked. The architect's operation was vast, connected, and deeply ingrained in the city's infrastructure. They had no allies, no safe houses. This was not a simple job, it was a war. The architect wasn't just ruthless. He was intelligent, a mastermind who had anticipated every move. Unlike Salvatore, he had no need for brute force. He relied on manipulation, infiltration, and psychological warfare. He knew the trio's weaknesses, their fears, their strengths. He played them like chess pieces on a board, setting traps that would bring them closer to him, only to spring them when they least expected it. Their first encounter with the architect's forces was a disaster. They walked into a trap set in an abandoned building. The trio was ambushed, separated, and forced to fight alone for the first time in years. The hits were harder, the stakes higher. Each of them was pushed to the edge of their abilities, fighting not just for survival but for the only thing that mattered now, each other. Chapter 11, Betrayal in the Shadows. Just when the trio thought they had outsmarted the architect, betrayal hit them again, this time from within. Marcus, always the most volatile of the three, had been wrestling with his demons. The architect had found his weakness, his rage. He exploited it, manipulating Marcus into turning against Alex and Ethan. He promised him power, the chance to finally be in control of his own fate, a life free from the chains of loyalty. Marcus left. The architect's control over Marcus was the final blow to the trio. Alex and Ethan, now facing the man they once called a brother, were forced into a brutal confrontation with him. But Marcus, even though he was tempted by power, still held a shred of his old self. Deep down, he couldn't fully betray the bond they had shared. The battle was bloody, and in the end, Marcus turned on the architect at the cost of his own life. Chapter 12, The Endgame. The final showdown took place in the heart of the city. The architect had been waiting for them, pulling every string to ensure his victory. But Alex and Ethan were not the same men who had once fought for a living. They had grown. They were no longer just hitmen, they were ghosts of the past, united not by violence, but by the memories of a better time. Together, they confronted the architect in his lair, a high-rise overlooking the city. It was a battle of wits, a war of survival, and ultimately, the architect was undone not by brute force, but by his own arrogance. In the end, Alex and Ethan emerged victorious, but not without loss. Marcus was gone, and the shadows that had once defined their lives would forever haunt them. Epilogue, the final silence. With the architect's fall, the power of the criminal syndicate crumbled. The three shadows had triumphed, but at a terrible cost. The city returned to chaos once again, and though their enemies were defeated, they could never erase the scars of their past. The trio vanished once again, each finding a new path, knowing that the only way to survive the world they had helped create was to never look back. They were no longer the three shadows, but ghosts, eternal reminders of the price of loyalty, betrayal, and the consequences of the lives they had chosen. And so, the myth lived on. But the men? They were gone.